Hello, my name is Hunter Schwenk, and my presentation is entitled Avoiding Anthropocene Extinction, an Analysis of Californian Climate Action Plans. So, the abstract, climate change poses severe and immediate risk to the United States, but to California in particular as a result of its geographic location and varied ecological biomes. Much of the state continuously deals with more frequent and more severe natural disasters, such as wildfires, floods, and sea level rise. Much of the Californian economy relies on tourism of its natural beauty, as well as the agricultural production of the Central Valley, and it is paramount that the state and local governments are able to sufficiently prepare for said natural disasters in order to mitigate damages both to landscape, to the population, and to the economy. These plans are referred to as climate action plans, CAPs for short, and many cities and counties in California have climate action plans in place currently. This study is going to be an attempt to analyze the current state of climate action plans as they exist in California. So why is this important? Climate change is a threat most claim is of the future, but in reality, it's happening right now. We can see the effects getting worse and worse every year. For example, here in the city, we see rainstorms are getting worse and worse. The sea level is rising in the Embarcadero, just local examples. Climate change has far-reaching impacts on agricultural food production, housing, and many other sectors of government. As climate change continues, the weather events will become more severe and more frequent, resulting in increased hardship for those in the affected regions, as well as an additional strain on governments and its ability to respond. So it's important to understand the risks that we are facing as administrators in order to better plan for the present. So as I mentioned, it's important to be informed of some of these risks. As such, I'm going to cover some of them briefly. Sea level rise threatens habitable land along the coast and causes property damage, lost property value, and a loss of arable land as covered by Californian hydrologist Dr. Heberger. We also have seen the growing threat of wildfires, excessive heat, and bad air quality. These have the added risk of additional strain on infrastructure, such as roads and the electric grid. And this is covered in a dissertation in Besha. We also see an additional demand for an increased scarcity of natural resources, such as water, as rainfall is decreasing steadily over the years. Groundwater is replenished less and less every year. And so, in addition to the increased scarcity of rainfall and water in general, there's also going to be an increased demand for water usage across the board, whether that be for plumbing, housing, potable water, farming. Um, Very much so a serious, serious risk. So now on to the literature review. We see here the challenges of climate planning are many, but can best be understood into the issues, um, sorry, the challenges can best be understood as adoption, implementation, framing, and funding. What we see here in the literature is that partisan bias plays a large role in this. It informs the language included in many climate action plans. A study from Angelo and others found that though liberal regions are more likely to have adopted climate action plans earlier, the language of equity is included more frequently in these areas in comparison to conservative regions, which have more likely adopted these climate action plans in recent years without language of equity. Um, and in regards to public support for climate action policy, people seem to be more receptive to climate action policy when it is not framed using climate or equity specific language. They are more receptive instead to specific policy framing such as electrical grid restructuring, fire preparedness, things that don't use climate terminology. We also see socioeconomic factors play a large role in whether or not someone is supportive of climate action policy, such as population size, um, of a city or county, household income, support from local leaders and the public are also largely important. Um, we see here that partisan attitudes are greatly influential here, as hinted at earlier in the adoption period. There's also issues to the implementation of climate action plans. Um, Getting a climate action plan adopted is one thing, but implementation is a whole other issue. A study from Caggiano and others reviewed 55 different climate action plans in California. Um, 5 cities had clearly defined metrics of equity. 3 of these we found are major cities in California. Uh, and those are Oakland, San Francisco, and San Diego. Oh, I seem to have misspoke. I'm sorry. The Caggiano study is based on 55 climate action plans in America. 3 of those cities are in California. My apologies. Um, Within the metrics of equity defined within Caggiano's study, less than 25% of these cities had demonstrated any measurable success. Um, However, a separate study from Georgetown University was a bit more forgiving, um, tracking a percentage of completed goals by state, additionally by issue. The study from Georgetown claims that as of 2015, states had yet to meet 50% of their goals. Additionally, a study from UGI shows that Californian households are more supportive of policies that do not use climate-based language, as I had mentioned before. Other interesting factors here in the issues of implementation um, is scholars from Southern California have actually found that there might be what they refer to as a contingent diffusion model, at least present within Southern California, but that may have applications to the state as a whole. And what that basically means is if one city or county adopts a climate action plan, neighboring regions are additionally more likely to also adopt a climate action plan. They also identified 4 of the most significant factors that they believe contribute to the adoption and implementation of climate action plans. And those are internal capacity, local constituency preferences, external support, and a transnational city network. There's other studies that also suggest that the level of public support is actually higher than what is currently reported due to the social stigma of perceived stereotypes of who typically supports climate action policy. And so in that study, they explain, for example, conservative farmers have more firsthand experience with the changes of climate change as it applies to agricultural production and are therefore supportive of climate action policy but cannot publicly say so because of the social stigma of their peers who do not necessarily support climate action or stereotype against those who do. Moving on to methods. So this is going to be um, a combination of a longitudinal study and a little bit of a cross-sectional study that combines and references secondary data from interdisciplinary sources. So I'm looking at environmental science on updated risks and how that impacts local areas. I'm looking at socioeconomic data, and I'm also looking at data on policy progress implementation of climate action plans, primarily sourced from the studies by Angelo and Caggiano. These are massively beneficial studies that have a lot of wide-reaching data that is very solid, but again, I feel like doesn't paint a good enough picture of the current state. Um, so therefore, the sampling plan is going to be built around accumulating secondary data from um, Angelo and Caggiano, and furthermore, selecting regions that have particular importance, such as population density or geographic location. Are these coastal cities? Are these cities in the Central Valley? Um, Cities with highways that have a lot of traffic, have a lot of tourism industry and whatnot. So, significant cities in California. Moving on to research questions. To answer the larger question of what is the current state of climate action plans in California, I have developed four smaller questions. And that is how many and to what extent have cities and counties in California successfully implemented climate action plans? How many of the neighboring regions have also adopted climate action plans? What level of progress have cities and counties achieved in implementation of these climate action plans? And what are the largest obstacles to these plans? In conclusion, some of my findings. The adoption and implementation of climate action plans primarily rely upon the influence of external factors, such as pressure from state governance and severe weather events on internal factors such as um, partisan attitudes and local support, essentially meaning that currently, unless the local population is already predisposed to supporting climate action plans, uh, the pathway forward for climate action in these areas more or less relies on the state to either put pressure on these governments to adopt climate action plans, or unfortunately, the alternative is people are more likely to support climate action plans after experiencing a severe weather event. Um, so those are external factors that can influence the internal opinions of regions that have yet to adopt climate action plans. Um, Policy framing is critical. As mentioned earlier, language focused on equity and climate change is actually less likely to gain support. People are more in favor of um, policy that's framed in specific terminology, such as, again, electrical grid restructuring, fire preparedness, and whatnot. Most cities and counties in California do currently have a climate action plan in place, though the language contained within varies depending on the partisan leaning of the region. And as well as the timeline of adoption. Liberal counties are more likely to have adopted these earlier. Most of these regions are still struggling to make progress with no notable success, unfortunately. Though there does, however, exist a possible contingent diffusion model. again, as discussed earlier, if one city adopts a climate action plan, neighboring regions are more likely to do the same. Limitations and areas for further study. There, of course, is a lot more to be said on the subject, but areas that I found that either are limiting to my own research or areas that don't have a lot of data available but are nonetheless helpful or interesting. Climate action plans are still a newer idea in America. So even though California began work on climate action plans considerably sooner than a lot of other places, data on climate action progress and implementation is fairly limited. And there does not seem to be much available information yet on implementation, or at least not currently updated levels of success with implementation. There's not exactly a lot of consistent follow-up on this subject. Furthermore, budgetary analysis of both state and county level would provide valuable insight into resource allocation for climate action plans and seeing how much of a financial priority it is for this region and the overall cost of these climate action plans. Um, Furthermore, exploration of other avenues beyond just changing local opinion and severe weather events would greatly um, improve the success of climate action plans, I believe, because um, as the current data seems to suggest, there are not many pathways forward beyond state pressure and severe weather events to determine local attitudes. Breaking down my research schedule, um, I will first of all start with highlighting regions of significant population and geographic location. I'll make note of important cities in those areas, their partisan tendency, and whether or not those cities have adopted climate action plans. More than likely they have. Uh, then I will move on to data analysis, analyzing obstacles to implementation, such as funding and public support. I will, in particular, be looking for areas that do not have a climate action in place, or those that have yet to make significant progress. Um, then I will move on to filling in gaps that might be present in the current information, primarily focusing on the more recently adopted climate action plans. And I will be attempting to highlight factors that contribute most significantly to generating public support for these plans. And then I will move on to a review and analysis of all my accumulated data and the interactions of the internal and external factors. Finally, I will be attempting to elaborate upon which avenues are most successful in adoption and implementation. And that is my presentation. I seem to have run a little long, but I thank you all for your time and your patience nonetheless. Um, Thank you for the wonderful 7 to 5 class, and I hope to see you all again next semester. Thank you.